Shalom. I want to start by giving all praises to
YAHAWAH, BAHASHAM, YAHAWASHI, BAHASHAM, Rakakadash.
Double honors to our teachers, the apostles of GreatMillStone. Peace and mercy to the elect. And shalom to the 1/3 of YAHAWAH, who today are known as the Negroes, Latinos, and Native Indians, who before losing their true heritage were known as the Israelites of the Holy Bible. Now in today's lesson, we're actually going to do something a little different. We're going to actually get into a bit of history, and we're going to explain the captivities of the nation of Israel. Again, the captivities of the Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans in ancient times all the way up to current times, and we're going to explain how this is all prophesied in the Bible. So to begin with, I'm going to start off with the main prophecy that goes into the captivities and why we will go into captivities, because we did not follow the Lord's laws. Now this was when Moses was on the scene, and we had just all come out of Egypt as slaves under slavery to the Egyptians. We basically, just like today, we're in secret slavery for the most part. We're tax slaves here in Babylon the Great, known as America in modern times. We were slaves in the old Babylon or Egypt back then. But let me get into the scriptures. This is Deuteronomy 28:68. And the Lord YAHAWAH shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again, and there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. And when you get into into that scripture specifically, when you look into the word Egypt, it's a representation of bondage, right? Because again, the ancient Egypt for the Israelites was a place of bondage. It was just one of our captivities. And again, when you get into the scriptures and you read the Bible for its true narrative, you find out that the Israelites, which is one of the 18 nations that exist in this world, went into some level of captivity. At first, minor captivities, and towards the end, until this day, major captivities, because of how much we went off and we didn't obey the Lord. Now, this was the curses that were going to come upon us if we, which had just come out of Egypt and were freed by the Lord, if we did not follow the Lord. This is what was going to happen to us. The Lord was going to put us back into Egypt again on ships, and He wasn't referring to that Egypt back then, because again, when you look on the map. No, I'm good up. When you look on the map, Israel is walking distance to Egypt. And you can't really take a ship. You could, but it makes no logistical sense. They were talking about the central voyage, which eventually both tribes would get. And we'll get back into the map in a little bit. But can you go ahead and read the first scripture? Rick? Oh, BAHASHAM. Let me, before he reads this, the brother's going to go ahead and read where Achior, who was the general of the Ammonite, who we would know as the Japanese army, he's describing us Israelites to the coming destroyers of the northern kingdom, the Assyrians, and particularly the general Heliophanes. He's going to explain how us Israelites either stay undefeated, or how we become weak and easy to conquer.
This is Judith chapter 5 verse 1. It says, Then was it declared to Holofernes, the chief captain of the army of the shore, that the children of Israel had prepared war, and had shut up the passages of the hill country, and had fortified all the tops of the high hills, and had laid impediments in the champaign countries. Wherewith he was very angry, and called all the princes of Moab, and the captains of Ammon, and all the governors of the sea coast. And he said unto them, Tell me now, ye sons of Canaan, who this people is, that dwelleth in the hill country, and what are the cities that they inhabit? And what is the multitude of their army? And wherein is their power and strength? And what king is set over them, or captain of their army? And why have they determined not to come and meet me, more than all the inhabitants of the west? Then said Achior, the captain of all the sons of Ammon, Let my lord now hear a word from the mouth of thy servant, and I will declare unto thee the truth concerning this people, which dwelleth near thee, and and inhabited the hill countries, and there shall no lie come out of the mouth of thy servant. These people are descendant of the Chaldeans.
Now, right there, when it says these people, talking about the Israelites, because again, these people saying that they were the descendant of the Chaldeans were the people or the elite class or the magicians of the people who dwelt inside of Assyria or Babylon at that time. Because again, they were both of those kingdoms, Assyria and Babylon, had basically come together, either through conquest or union. Now, the Lord, after not dealing with us for a while, He eventually came and He spoke to our forefather, Abram, right? Who He changed his name to Abraham, and Abraham came out of the Chaldeans. Apostle Tahar made actually all the apostles made this beautiful documentary called Urs of the Chaldees. You should look it up on YouTube right now. It's really good. I think it's like a 4-hour document. It's a really long documentary, but it goes into depth about how Abraham came out of the Chaldees and who or what the city was of the Chaldees and stuff. And then continue up.
It says, these people are descendant of the Chaldeans, and they sojourned heretofore in Mesopotamia, because they would not follow the gods of their fathers, which were in the land of Chaldea.
And he's referring to those idols which the Chaldeans or the Babylonians worship, who ultimately, when you get past all the fake names and all the bullshit, the Marduk, the Baal, it goes all the way back to Nimrod and his wife Semiramis, who, when you get into Genesis 11 and 13, it talks about how they were the first Antichrist who raised up and basically ruled all the people about 200 years after the flood.
It says, and they sojourned heretofore in Mesopotamia, because they would not follow the gods of their fathers, which were in the land of Chaldea. For they left the way of their ancestors and worshipped the power of heaven, the power whom they knew. So they cast them out from the face of their gods, and they fled into Mesopotamia and sojourned there many days.
God. And there you go. And that right there, for the most part, is how us Israelites, or Negroes, Latinos, and Native Indians today got established as a people. Our forefather, Abraham, was pulled out of that filth, and he was brought to the west into what we know today as the land of Israel, right? Namely, on top of the mountain where today you could see the, it's that Rock of the Dome, or the Dome of the Rock. That particular part of that land in Israel is where Abraham was brought to. That's also the place where they were going to sacrifice, or Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac to. It's the place where Jacob, he had a dream on that rock. It's that same location. That rock is that Rock of the Dome. Okay? If you go ahead and get Judith 13 and 14.
This is Judith.
Oh wait, Salaki. Did you have any more? Oh, Papa, please read, because we need to talk about how we get destroyed. Salaki, yeah.
This is verse 9. It says, then their power commanded them to depart from the place where they sojourned, and to go into the land of Canaan, where they dwelt, and were increased with gold and silver and with very much cattle. But when a famine covered all the land of Canaan, they went down into Egypt and sojourned there.
And that right there is talking about, that right there glazed over, or glossed over, when Joshua basically took over all the land of Canaan and basically kicked out all those Hamites and made that land ours. And then also talks about the great famine that came, the 7-year famine that came, where the Lord, through His mighty power, maneuvered Joseph to become the second ruler of Egypt, and eventually usher us Israelites into Egypt and into a bit of a rest before we became into slavery, and where Genesis, for the most part, starts off, or finishes off, excuse me.
It says, they went down into Egypt and sojourned there while they were nourished, and became there a great multitude, so that one could not number their nation. Therefore the king of Egypt rose up against them and dealt subtly with them, and brought them low with laboring in brick, and made them slaves. Then they cried unto their power, and he smote all the land of Egypt with incurable plagues. So the Egyptians cast them out of their sight. And the Most High dried the Red Sea before them, and brought them to Mount Sinai and Kadesh Barnea, and cast forth all that dwelt in the wilderness. So they dwelt in the land of the Amorites, and they destroyed by their strength all them of Esabon, and passing over Jordan, they possessed all the hill country. And they cast forth before them the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Jebusite, the Sycamite, and the Girgashites, and they dwelt in the country many days. And whilst they sinned not before their power, they prospered because the Most High that hated iniquity was with them. But when they departed from the way which he appointed them, they were destroyed in many battles, very sore, and were led captives into a land that was not theirs.
And that right there is basically explaining how we got carried away into captivity, right? So go for it, Bob.
It says, and the temple of their power was cast to the ground, and their cities were taken by the enemies. But now are they returned to their power, and are come up from the places where they were scattered, and have possessed Jerusalem, where their sanctuary is, and are seated in the hill country, for it was desolate.
And that ultimately is talking about the return from Babylon and stuff, and how Nehemiah and Ezra, well actually Ezra and Nehemiah, they were the prophets during that time, and that's when the Lord gave Ezra back the entire Bible again at that point, which was pretty much from Genesis, or the Torah, and up until Nehemiah, because Ezra used to be, I think, 4 or 5 books. First Ezra, second Ezra, third Ezra, fourth Ezra, and I think Nehemiah, they were to get those were together, but they've been separated since. And then, was there any more? No. Okay. So pretty much the thing is that when you get into that, ATHAH goes on and he talks about how when these people, us Israelites, when we sin, the Lord he flees from us and he's not with us. But when we do not sin and we keep the laws, we prosper, right? Just like how he explained here at Judith, how we got put back into the land and we started worshiping our God again. Again, when we do right, we get dealt with rightly and righteously. But when we sin, we get punished for it right away. Can you go ahead and read 13 and 14, Judith?
This is Judith 13 and 14. It says, then she said to them with a loud voice, praise Yahawah, praise Yahawah, I say, for he had not taken away his mercy from the house of Israel, but had destroyed our enemies by mine hands this night. You want to keep going?
Yeah, this is going to be
all the way through? So she took the head out of the bag and showed it and said unto them, behold, the head of the Olopharnes, Eleopharnes, Salak, the water, bro. Eleopharnes, the chief captain of the army of Assur, and behold, the canopy wherein he did lie in his drunkenness, and the Lord had smitten him by the hand of a woman, as the Lord liveth, who had kept me in my way that I went, my countenance had deceived him to his destruction, and yet had he not committed sin with me to defile and shame me. Then all the people were wonderfully astonished and bowed themselves and worshipped Yahawah and said with one accord, blessed be thou our power, which has this day brought to naught the enemies of thy people.
And there you go. So what you just read in the beginning was this heathen, Eleophanes, which was the general of the conquering power at that time, the Babylonians, right? He had come to take us down, us being the northern kingdom, right? Because by this time, the northern kingdom had gone fully off. And it was decided by the Lord that they were going to be carried away and they were going to be kicked out of the land. Because we had been going off and worshiping different idols and doing abominations. So like I said, this brother here read when Eleophanes came up and he spoke to the Ammonite, or what we would know today as the Japanese man, ATHAH, who explained who we were. Talked about how when we sin, when we do good by our God or our Lord, He'll raise us up, like this brother just read here, right? But again, this whole event that's going on is the eventual downfall of the northern kingdom. Even though the Lord spared us for a little bit with the help of Judith, eventually the destruction of the northern kingdom would eventually come, which is explained in 2 Kings 17 and 23. Can you get it up?
2 Kings 17 and 23, it says, until Yahawah removed Israel out of his sight, as he has said by all his servants, the prophets. So was Israel carried away out of their own land to Assyria unto this day.
And there you go. And that's when the eventual battles, because once, because it explains in Judith that when all the Babylonians seen Eleophanes headless in his tent, that they all ran once the Israelites were coming down the hill, right? But eventually, later on, the Babylonians sent more troops and eventually take us down and slaughter many. And I think it was like 200,000 men who were taken to, or 200,000 people were taken to Assyria. I'm sure there's more than that. But the thing is, and they even, and the the Babylonians back, the Assyrians back then, who Heliophanes was the general of, they were one of the first nations to not kill their conquered subjects. Because before the Babylonians kind of took power, when a country would come into another country, they would go in and they would kill all the men, and that was it. And they would take the women as booty, which is where that word comes from. And they would, basically impregnate those women, and they would bring more seeds from their own people. But when the Assyrians and eventually the Babylonians would come into power, they had this thing where they would just bring everybody into a melting pot. They would mix everybody. And the way that they would do this is that they would uproot the people, and they would take them out of their land, and they would put them into someplace else, and they would seed their land with other heathens. And that's exactly what happened. When we were taken away to Assyria, they had brought in other heathens to dwell in that land. And this is where you get into stories about when those heathens got attacked by lions, so they had to bring back a Levite priest to teach those heathens how to live properly in that land so they don't get fucked up. So that happened.
But real quick, just at the time, also during the time of YAHAWASHI, when he met the Samaritan woman at the well, man.
Yep.
Basically she was one of the descendants of those heathens that were living in that land because of the book of Kings, man. Those heathens that were implanted in that land.
And just like you have the so-called Jews today pretending to be the Southern Kingdom, back then you had the so I don't even know what heathens they were, but you had those fake Samaritans pretending to be the Northern Kingdom, right? And it's a pattern, right? Just like back then when the Lord took away our heritage, He brought other people in to stand in and play our role. Just like today, the Southern Kingdom's having other imposters stepping in to play their roles as the real Jews, right? But the real Jews are who you know today as the so-called Negroes, right? The so-called Jews today who run everything, own all the banks, own all the diamond mines, own all the lawyer firms, own all the countries, own all the land, own the whole world. They're the ones who the Bible refers to as Amalek. But we're getting off topic. Let's get back to Dawda. Did you have any more left on second?
That was it.
Khan. And then, can you read? Now, by this time, when we got carried away in Assyria, so 1340, just a bit, like I said, they didn't, Assyria and Babylon, they weren't those countries where they would simply just go and slaughter everybody. They basically would take their conquerors, they would, inflict, actually on our people, they inflicted massive trauma and killed off a lot of our people. But those who survived, they brought them back to Assyria. It tells you that they got planted in Nineveh, and that's where you get the book of Tobit. That story kind of comes from there, because he's in that area. So he was one of the dispersed northern kingdom Israelites, and then they stayed there for about 100 years. And then comes the time of 605 BC when Assyria falls to the Babylonians. By this time, the captives of Assyria, for the most part, go free. And this is when, history tells you that the northern kingdom was, for the most part, no longer slaves. And again, if you read Book of Tobit, like I just said, you could also see this in what's depicted there. Tobit himself had made a good business for him, where he had enough money to where he could store it away in Persia, which today would be Iran. So now, by that time, we had become a bit established in Assyria, where we had the means to actually leave Assyria and go away on our own. And this scripture here explains where we went. Go ahead, Art.
This is 2nd Ezra 13 and 40. And those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Assyria, the king whom Salmanassar, the king of Assyria, led away captive. And he carried them over the waters, and so they came into another land. But they took this counsel amongst themselves, that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country where never man dwelt, never mankind dwelt.
Okay, please stop. Okay, so at this point, we were dwelling in Assyria, right? And we decided we wanted to leave, and we didn't want to follow the heathens. Now, at that point, this was the whole known world. At the time, all the Hamites, all the Shemites, all the Japhites all lived on this side of the earth. Nobody knew anything about the other side of the world, right? So this couldn't be, we didn't go to Russia, we didn't go down to Africa, we didn't go to Australia, because those lands were known about. So the land that was unknown at the time was the land that was in the west, what was known as Azarath. Continue up.
And this is 42. They that might there kept their statutes which they never kept in their own land, and they entered into Euphrates by a narrow passage of the river. For the Most High then showed signs from heaven, and held still the flood till they were passed over. And that flood that he's referring to is when you come around this corner here, under the Horn of Africa, this area right here is all referred to as the Hurricane Alley. And this is why all the tornadoes that you see today, they all come down from this area, this stuff, right? But this is ultimately is the area that the brother last week explained. This is the area which is where the flood was kept still. Now, if you go into Mayan history, and if you look at, or if you read their history, they talk about how their forefather, who I forgot what they call his name, but basically it's Noah, how he held the flood through, and they, or how he held the flood and they crossed over the Red Sea, and also how he was able, they came from the east, which would be Israel, and they eventually came to America. That's the whole story of Aslan, is that we would eventually get back to our homeland, which was in the east. And again, when you're in the Americas, east is over here. So again, that's what the whole Aslan was. Continue reading up. This is 45. For through that country there were a great way to go, namely of a year and a half, and the same region is called Asareth.
And that's exactly what this land was, right? Because this was an unknown land. No people had dwelt over here during that time that we know of in the Bible. Now, notice right there in the scripture, it talked about a 3-year voyage. Now, we know that they took a year and a half to come one way, and the reason is because this is explained when Solomon had the Hamites in subjection. And you had the king of Tyre. He was basically around here where Carthage is at, in this little area here. Can you go ahead and read the precept? So in Carthage, again, the people who dwelt there, King Solomon had them in subjection, and they were known to be great sailors and stuff. So when King Solomon, when he would have them go to this other world, which is where you get those Olmec statues that are here in the Americas, that's where those actually come from. Now, the Hamites would sail across and basically come down here and collect the peacocks, gold, and all the valuables. Apes, monkeys, and actually really monkeys, like the brother was saying last week. So those type of things that King Solomon, who was the greatest king who ever existed on the planet, would have in his menagerie and everything, right? This is what made him so great, is that he paid those Hamites to come from their area down here. And there's also an account of the Carthaginians when they actually where one of their sailors, or one of their generals, or captains, excuse me, explained that on one of his voyages out to the west that they encountered an island with inhabitants who were happy people who had siestas in the summertime. They would go to their summer villages, and I'll make a video on that separately, but that just proves that us Northern Kingdom, we had already been over here, and even the Hamites had seen us. And also in that same account, the captain, when he goes back to the Senate to tell them what he had found in the west, the Senate voted to not go to the west, or not to go to the west, but that they would leave it open for future exploration. And is there any more on that? Or you got it, Ak?
Yeah, I got the scripture.
All right, so this explains about the year-and-a-half journey across the Atlantic Ocean.
This is the 1 Kings 10:22. All right. It's 1 Kings 10 and 22. For the king had a sea. Wait, my bad. For the king had at sea a navy of Tarshish.
Tarshish?
Tarshish.
Or the Hamites, who basically were inhabiting Carthage at the time.
With the navy of Aram, once in 3 years came the navy of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver, ivory, and apes and peacocks. So King Solomon exceeded all the kings of the earth for riches and for wisdom. And all the earth sought to Solomon to hear his wisdom, which the Most High had put in his heart. And they brought every man his present, vessels of silver and vessels of gold, and garments and armor and spices, horses and mules, a rate year by year.
So right there, the point that was made in that scripture is that for the voyage from Carthage down to Asarath and then back was 3 years. And so again, that's a two-way journey. So a one-way journey was just from around was just a year and a half. So
1 Kings 10 and 22.
So next, after or second Ezra's, okay, that's it for you, right? Okay, come on. So by that time, so by that time, so that right there just shows or breaks down about how us Northern Kingdom had come over here. Now that we had got here to the Americas, those records have been lost because when the Spaniards came over here, the Edomites, they had basically destroyed all our records, right? So I think today there's only 24 Aztec codices left, and then whatever's left from the missionaries who managed to save some of the books that went up in the great missionary fires that went on back then, that destroyed all their books and records, and then plus the secret documents which are kept in the Vatican that everybody knows exist that you'll never be able to see. Now, but one thing that we do have are the historic records that show that when the settlers came over here, or the missionaries came over here, they found us speaking Quichua, which is a broken form of Hebrew. We recited the Israelite Credo, the Shemai prayer. What else did we do?
Fringes, circumcisions.
We were doing we were doing many of the customs which Israelites were doing.
Oh, the land Sabbath.
The land Sabbath. We were keeping the land Sabbath. We even had the Aztecs had the 8 commandments instead of 10 commandments. But for the most part, if you read every of the 8 commandments, they were all pretty much the same. And the other things too, you had
Passover.
Oh, you had the Passover. That was another thing that was another thing that we would do back then. Before the Aztecs or the Mayans would go into war, they would carry what would be considered a replica of the Ark of the Covenant, right? They carried a golden box and stuff that was decorated, right? They were doing what the Israelites were doing in the Old Torah, okay? So pretty much now you know where the Northern Kingdom at this point was established, and we stayed there for about 1,500 years before we were discovered by Christopher Colon, whose holiday was just yesterday, which was just celebrated and shit. So, but next we're going to go ahead and, after the Northern Kingdom's captivity, we're now going to go ahead and jump forward about another 100. What was it? It was 597 to 586 BC. It took 3 years for the Southern Kingdom to next be expelled from Israel, and this took place. I'd say that would be that's like a little bit over 100 years that the Southern Kingdom managed to stay in the land of Israel before they eventually would also get kicked out. And again, because this is all prophesized, because both the Southern and the Northern Kingdom, we both went off, we were both wicked as heck, and the Lord eventually was going to make us fulfill that curse that was foretold in Deuteronomy 28:68.
Yep.
So can you get 2 Kings 25 to 21?
Yep, 2 Kings 25 and 21. It says, "And the king of Babylon smote them, and slew them at Riblah in the land of Hamath. So Judah was carried away out of their land." And
there you go. And that's where Judah right there gets taken down and stuff. And when you look at the last 100 years, or roughly around 100 years that Judah was in that land, a lot of their kings had started going off. They basically, and remember at this time, Israel wasn't a world power, I guess you could say, right? It was just basically a small province. The real rulers at the time were the Babylonians and the Assyrians. They were fighting back and forth. When Israel, the Northern Kingdom, was taken down, Assyria was in power. 605 BC comes, Babylon eventually takes back power from Assyria, takes them out, and then 597 BC, and after all the political scandals of all kings not paying it's not called ransom, so like, what is it called, the tribute? Not paying the tribute to the Babylonians, because they believe that now that the Assyrians are out, that they don't have to pay the Babylonians. See, the northern kingdom had hooked up with Egypt to try to rebel against Assyria, and that's why they got taken down. The southern kingdom also did the same thing, and they joined up and they rebelled against the Babylonians because they were backing up the Egyptians at that too. And that's when the kings eventually just took them out. Now, when you look at the king of Babylon that eventually took out the Egyptian, or the southern kingdom, this was King Nebuchadnezzar, who, let's see, so King Nebuchadnezzar, who lived during 634 BC to 562 BC. He's eventually the one who came in and took the southern kingdom into Babylon. And when they took him into Babylon, they burnt the Bible. We had no more records of the law. And we had basically dwelt there for was it 70 years, right? And we dealt there for 70 years until we were free. But during that time, Ezra, he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord gave him back the Bible. And this is actually explained in 2nd Ezra. It's a beautiful story explaining how we got the Bible back. And this is why when you read Genesis, Genesis refers to Moses in the third person. Moses doesn't say, I did this and I did that. It says, Moses did this and Moses did that. And that's because Ezra was the one who was writing the Bible again, from Genesis again to I think the last book of Nehemiah. Is there any more on that?
No, that was it.
All right, can you get the next scripture?
This is First Ezra 1:1. This is First Ezra 1:1. And Hosea held the feast of the Passover in Jerusalem unto his Lord, and offered the Passover the 14th day of the first month. Keep going.
Keep going, yeah.
It says, having set the priests according to their daily courses, being arrayed in long garments in the temple of the Lord. And he spake unto the Levites, the holy ministries of Israel, that they should hallow themselves unto the Lord, to set the holy ark of the Lord in the house that King Solomon, the son of David, had built. And said, ye shall no more bear the ark upon your shoulders. Now therefore serve the Lord your power, and minister unto this people Israel, and prepare you after your families and kindreds. Keep going.
Yeah, keep going. One more scripture, I think.
According as David the king of Israel prescribed, and according to the magnificence of Solomon his son, and standing in the temple according to the several dignity of the families of you, the Levites, who minister in the presence of your brethren, the children of Israel.
Come on. So for the most part, Cyrus, who was who eventually would take over the Babylonians, because what eventually happens is that the Babylonians get taken down, not by a big war, but by an internal decay of the corrupt politicians, and also the Chaldeans, who were for the most part the Assyrians, who wanted to see the Babylonian Empire be taken down. So eventually, Cyrus, the Persian, he eventually, through a coup, took over Babylon and basically took over. And this happened in 539 BC. Cyrus conquers Babylon, and this is actually told in Isaiah 44:28, or it refers to Cyrus, or the prophecy that a future servant of the Lord would come to free the Lord's people, and his name would be Cyrus. Who has that scripture?
42:1.
Come on, Papa Bishop.
This is Isaiah 42:1. It says, behold, my servant, whom I uphold, mine elect, in whom my soul delighted, I have put my spirit upon him. He shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles. You going?
You want to come?
It says, he shall not cry, nor lift up, nor cause his voice to be heard in the street. A bruised reed shall he not break, and the smoking flax shall he not quench. He shall bring forth judgment unto truth.
Is this 44 and 28?
This is 42.
Oh, BAHASHAM. Yeah, it's 44 and 28. BAHASHAM.
44.
Because what happens is, it talks about how the Lord, He is going to put us into captivity, but eventually He's going to free us through His servant Cyrus. BAHASHAM.
Isaiah
44 and 28.
44 and 28. That saith of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and shall perform all my pleasure, even saying to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built, and to the temple, thy foundation shall be laid.
Perfect. Can you also skip to 45 and 1? So right there, the Lord is prophesying that eventually there is going to be a man who stands up named Cyrus, his shepherd, right? And this was during the time of Isaiah, about 200 years before, or 200-300 years before Cyrus the second actually came and actually did that. Now, if you go into the Persian history, Cyrus II wasn't the first, obviously, right? There's more Cyruses before him, and it was a very popular name because it was kind of like a known prophecy for about 200 years that somebody of great stature called Cyrus would come and do the Lord's will and would do favor to the children of Israel.
Isaiah 45 and 1, it says, thus said Yahweh to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden to subdue nations before him. And I will loose the loins of kings to open before him the two-leaved gates, and gates shall not be shut.
And there you go. And just like I said, the Persians didn't take Babylon over by massive war and conquest. They did it through sly hands. The story goes that the gates were left open for the Persians to come in and take over. This is where you get the story of the writings on the wall, when you had Belshazzar having the party and actually using the Lord's sacred items for the party. You know, see, that's how the Lord works, right? Now, Babasha, if you could, let's see, Greece. So let's see, 42. So for the most part, by that time, the Lord had put Cyrus the Great, who he's referred to in Iran, He put him in power. And just like how He put this devil, Esau, who are today known as the so-called white people, or we would know them as the Caucasian race today, He put them in power. He had put Cyrus in power back then. And just like how He used them back then, He's going to use them again at the end of our age, when World War III comes upon us, because Iran is going to be one of the major players who's going to come up against America to destroy it. Now, so now that we've been freed and let back into our land to build the foundations, as the brother stated, at this point, we dwelt in that land, or the Southern Kingdom was able to dwell in that land peacefully for until the Greeks came. The Greeks for about 200, 300 years, until 331 BC, when the so-called Greeks, or what they were calling themselves at the time, the Macedonians, but whose true identity is known as the Edomites, or who you would call the Caucasians, they eventually came through. And they came through, like I said again, in 331 BC, and this is a very pivotal part of the Bible. And the reason is because this is actually recorded in what's known today as the Apocrypha, which is the 14 books which were removed from the original 1611 Bible, right? And the reason why it was removed is because it actually tied the history that we have just been going over to the actual scriptures of the Bible. And this is how the devil accomplished turning a historic document into what he would refer to as a book of fairy tales. By severing this link from ancient history to modern history, he's able to say that these old stories have no bearing to true facts. But as we just went through, Cyrus existed, Nebuchadnezzar II existed, and all these people existed, right? And what we're going to get into right now in Maccabees 1:1 is we're going to talk about how the Greeks, who were the Edomites at the time, they eventually came in and they started taking over, just as the Babylonians had taken over so long ago. Can you go and read it off?
You want the Daniels first?
Oh, Bokasha, please. That's right.
This is Daniel's 11:1. It says, also I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength through his riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. And a mighty king shall stand up, that shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will.
And there you go. So see, here's another person that the Lord is using to fulfill his will. And this person here in particular was an Edomite. This is where the prophecies and the blessings of Esau would actually start coming into play. Because, again, everything that is written in the Bible that has been requested by a saint, be it King David, all the way back to Abraham, all those things that they requested have to be played out. So when Israel blessed Esau, his son, and said that he would live on the fatness of the earth and that he would have dominion of the earth until the end of the time, until the end of the world, this is the beginning of it, where he basically put it into the spirit of Alexander the Great's father, Philip, the Macedonian, to start bringing together all those freaking sheep herders of that land to bring them, to bind them together, to take over the neighboring tribes and eventually take over the Macedonian name, and then eventually go down into Greece, which the brother's going to go ahead and continue. That's the Lord putting the spirit on the Edomites to come up and be raised into power. And this, again, this is where the Caucasians that we know of today started their reign of power on the earth. And this is why when you go into high school, this is as far back as they'll teach you, because they are not going to teach you other people's history.
Actually, let me get this in Maccabees. First Maccabees chapter 1, starting at 1. It says, and it happened after that Alexander, son of Philip the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Chittim, and had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead the first over Greece, and made many wars, and won many strongholds, and slew the kings of the earth, and went through to the ends of the earth, and took spoils of many nations, insomuch that the earth was quiet before him, whereupon he was exalted, and his heart was lifted up. And he gathered a mighty strong host, and ruled over countries, and nations, and kings, who became tributaries unto him. And after these things he fell sick, and perceived that he should die. Wherefore he called his servants, such as were honorable, and had been brought up with him from his youth, and parted his kingdom among them while he was yet alive.
And this right here refers to when Alexander, he had lived, and he had died at a very young age. When you get into into his 4 generals, you see that Alexander died in 323 BC, and his 4 generals that eventually would take over would be Cassander, who took over Macedonia at the time, and then he lived from 350 BC to 297 BC. Next, you would have Lysimachus, who lived from 361 BC to 281 BC. Lysimachus eventually took what you would know as, I believe, Lysimachus took Rome, right? Or like, I'm sorry, he took Greece, what you would know today as Greece or West Turkey today. Then you had Ptolemy. Ptolemy was probably one of the most famous of the 4. He took over Egypt, and at this point, it's because of him that the so-called Caucasians today say that they are the Egyptians. But again, by this time when Ptolemy took over, and to the end of his lineage, Cleopatra, they were all Edomites. Next, you had Seleucid, who also was he took over Persia or the East. Now, Seleucus was the king of the South.
No, Ptolemy was.
Salaki. Oh yeah, that's right. Egypt in the south. Yeah, so Ptolemy was the king of the south, referred to in the Bible, and Seleucus is the king of the north. These two would eventually continually fight and stuff, and the scriptures even get into Cleopatra and how they try to tie or close the breaches between their people, but that never worked out. So Is there any more on that?
Yeah, it says, wherefore he called his servants such as were honorable and had been brought up with him from his youth, and parted his kingdom among them while he was yet alive. So Alexander reigned 12 years and then died, and his servants bare rule every one in his place. And after his death they all put crowns upon themselves, so did their sons after them many years, and evils were multiplied in the earth.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, that's just talking about when the Greeks, or the so-called white man, all right, like the scriptures talk about how he is the wicked. When he came into power, like the brother explained first, that's when evils began to multiply upon the face of the earth, man. That's when he started to make Jake, when he put us, I'm pretty sure the brother's going to go into how he's going to have, started with Antiochus, had our people in captivity, had them, he took over all of our holy temples and all of that, had us sacrificing swine's meat upon the altar, and doing all manner of wickedness, man. You know, so, yeah.
Can I say something? He's basically the one who gave a license to be wicked, you know? He's the one, he gave everybody permission, you know, just to do everything contrary against the scripts, you know?
And again, and if you haven't read it, really Second Maccabees is where the meat of the battling and the craziness that happened to our people when the Greeks came in, right? Because until that time, the Southern Kingdom had dwelt safely for the most part in Israel, simply just paying tributes to the king of Persia. But again, when the Greeks came in, I think it was about a year that after they came through, they conquered. They didn't really destroy Israel, but the Edomites, they eventually, you know, they kept going east. But about a year later, you had their people come through, and you could read about the tales of the crazy things that they did, from take all our money in our banks to kill our people, to there's a crazy story about how this woman, her 7 children were killed because they wouldn't eat pork, right? And it just shows you the devil that was in these Edomites when they came into power.
Yep, they were making our, if we were found circumcising our children and all that, a lot of them, will be put to death. You know? Hang them.
I got my scripture on there. This is 1 Maccabees 1:60. It says, at which time, according to the commandment, they put to death certain women that had caused their children to be circumcised.
So see, at this point is where is the beginning where the Southern Kingdom is starting to lose their heritage, right? It eventually would be a long process. Eventually wouldn't be fulfilled until about the 1600s. But at this point is where Israel, the Southern Kingdom, who was in Israel, no longer had real control, and they were being taken away from their power. This is where Yahweh was removing their heritage. Is there any more on that? Or?
Yeah, there's actually a little more. And they hanged the infants about their necks and rifled their houses and slew them that had circumcised them.
So as you see, right, they rifled their houses, right? So just like back then, where they destroyed the Southern Kingdom, they eventually would do the exact same thing to the Northern Kingdom over here in the Americas when the Spaniards would come through. Now, at this point, I'm not going to get too much into this because again, we could go on forever on this topic. But I'm going to move forward to the Roman captivity. See, because what a lot of people don't realize, and this is made vague on purpose because you're not supposed to know this. This is the hidden history that they don't want you to know about in school, and they only get to this in college level or university level history. But by the time that Alexander the Great and all his generals were doing all their mischiefs in Greece, and they were conquering in that area, you had a group of Edomites who also had set up in the land of what we know today as Rome. At that time, that land had been inhabited by the descendants of Japhet, or who we know today on the 18 nations as Kittim, right? They would be today, they're the Japhetic people today, right? They're not the Filipinos,
Samoans,
the Samoans, the
Pacific
Hawaiians,
Islanders,
the Pacific Islanders, the South Sea people, right? Those people were dwelling in the land at that time. But again, amongst them, you had a group of people, or Edomites, who had come from the east, who dwelt in a city called Latinum, which is basically right in modern day Rome, right? And that's where, if you get into the Roman history or the ancient history, you see that Latinum and their king eventually started Rome, right? Now, eventually, because the Edomites that were in Rome were the cousins of the Edomites that were in Greece and who were in full power, you eventually would, after the Greeks have taken over all that land, eventually the power structure moved to Rome. And this is where you fast forward and you get into the gospel, where you have YAHAWASHI when he comes onto the scene, and all the apostles, they're living in Israel under the control of the now Romans, who truly were the Edomites, right? And at this point, the Maccabeans, who had tried to put up a fight, who had birthed the Sicarii and who had tried to fight against the Grecians when they had become into power, the Maccabees, who the books are named after, they eventually were bred out. They were killed off, and their daughters were married to these Edomites, who we know today as Herod the Creep. Right? They call him Herod the Great and stuff. But that's eventually talks about how the Edomites got at the head of our power structure. There's a great HBO show called Rome, where it actually shows Herod coming to Rome and showing how he's going to sell out the Israelites during that time. But let me go ahead. We're going to get back into the 70 AD destruction. Can you get the Matthews?
Daniel's.
Or Daniel's. Come on. But before this, just to let you know, this was prophesied what would happen when the Roman Empire, or the beast, which was scarier than the other ones, would eventually come into power, the fourth beast. This is foretold by Daniel. Go ahead and read it up.
This is Daniel's 9:26. And after 62 weeks shall Mashiach be cut off. Mashiach be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. And unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and the determined shall be poured upon the desolate.
And there you go. So that was the prophecy that the Messiah, who we know today, whose true name is YAHAWASHI, who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ, that was the prophecy that he referenced in Matthew 24 and 15. Can you get that?
Matthew 24 and 15, it says, "When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, who readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains."
And see, and right there, that was the Messiah, YAHAWASHI, warning the southern kingdom that when these things come to play, with the prophecies that Daniel talked about actually happen, when you see the temple being defiled, go into the mountains. And the mountains that he was referring to were where you have it's basically Carthage area, the West Africa area, those mountains, right? He told them to flee into Africa. And
because the Romans were besieging basically Jerusalem, man. They were ransacking all of their temples, man, you know. And eventually, like Yahushua prophesied, he told them that, like, when these things happen, when the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, that's basically talking about those Romans, those Edomites, man. They were the abominations of desolation. They were there to destroy and ransack Jerusalem at the time, okay? So eventually, what you had is you had some Israelites that were taken into captivity into Rome, and then you had some of them who actually took heed to what Yahushua said, all right, flew or fled into what we know as the east coast of Africa, or into the interiors of Africa, that is, you know, into Egypt, and then all into some went into South Africa, some went to West Africa, okay?
Mainly West Africa.
Mainly West Africa.
That's where Timbuktu, Mali, some great civilization.
And right here, if you look on the map, this shows where the southern kingdom fled. They went down the Sinai Peninsula. That's where you got the Mali tribe, and you got their recent DNA showing that their DNA line do go back to the Israelites. You also got the Israelites who fled into Carthage, and also the west coast of Africa. And just like the northern kingdom, who dwelt over here in the Americas for 1,500 years, the southern kingdom, they would eventually be refugees in Africa. Again, hear that carefully, people. You Negroes out there, you are refugees in Africa.
Yeah.
You were taken from this land. This wasn't your land. Your land is over here in Israel. You were refugees in a foreign land, and you were taken slaves.
And there's a difference between, because not all dark-skinned people are the same, you know?
Right.
So that's where that confusion comes in, man. You know, our people think that, oh, all Africans, we are the same people just because, no, that's not true, man. You know, we were actually, the ones that were taken into slavery, into captivity by the so-called white man, that was us, the Israelites, man. Because that was prophesied for us to happen to us, man. We won't have to go back into slavery again on ships, man. All right, like we read in Deuteronomy 28 chapter earlier, man. And if I could just get real quick, we'll get it right after I read it. Because what we're going to get is an excerpt from this book called Babylon to Timbuktu. But first and foremost, I'm going to read this precept. It says, this is Revelation chapter 12, verse 13. It says, and when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. Talking about YAHAWASHI. But verse 14, it says, and to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness. Now that woman is talking about the nation of Israel, because when you go into Jeremiah, I believe it's the 5th chapter, the nation of Israel is likened unto a comely and delicate woman. Okay, that's how the Most High sees us as his woman. Okay, so that's what it's talking about. That's who the woman represents, is us. It says that she might fly into the wilderness. Now that was talking about during the time of 70 AD, when we were facing Roman persecution. It says, into her place where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the face of the serpent. So that wilderness is talking about basically the interiors of Africa, man.
Perfect.
All right.
And the reason why they had to flee into there, again, it goes back to the 70 AD destruction, because by that time you had the Roman emperors, namely Vespasian, who was born in, who reigned from, 69, here we go, who reigned from 69 AD to 79 AD. He had, eventually, when he came into power, by the time he came into power, Rome was in tatters politically. There was no real, the previous emperor Nero had just burned down the city. Shit was going, people were going crazy. He eventually died off, and Vespasian was trying to take control. And one of the campaigns that he did to garner honor was to take down the rebellious nation of Israel, who for the most part were a rebellious group, right? Because by this time, 40 years had passed since YAHAWASHI had been crucified, and you had a mass growing of followers, exactly. So Vespasian eventually wanted to put an end to that. Now during the siege, Rome had gone into crisis because they didn't have an emperor. So he had to flee back to Rome to secure that title. So he left his son, Titus, who would eventually reign from 79 AD after his father to 81 AD. Now, he eventually takes down the southern kingdom, and this is where, when they fled to Africa, and this is where it's recorded in Timbuktu. Now, he eventually would conquer them, and he would make monuments to the conquering. But let me let the brother read the historic account of this.
Right, so this is the book From Babylon to Timbuktu by Rudolph R. Windsor. Okay, so he's basically a well-known historian. All right, so he does his research and all that. So this is page 84. It says, in the second paragraph, it says, in the year 65 BC, the Roman armies under General Pompey captured Jerusalem. It says in 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son Titus put an end to the Jewish state with great slaughter. It says during the period of the military governors of Palestine, many outrages and atrocities were committed against the residue of the people. During the period from Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that over 1 million Jews, Israelites, fled into Africa. fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves. So that goes into what I was saying earlier. Some went into slavery and some fled.
And that's exactly what happened. So as you've seen, just as the previous world empires, Rome had sought to mimic the previous empires. One of these traits being that they would take in their captives as slaves and eventually immerse them into the whole lifestyle and civilization. This is why Jake, who went into Rome as a slave, eventually came up and became the emperor, right? The holy, and this happened about let's see, it really started with Nerva, who was the first Jake emperor, but eventually it didn't really take flight until Septimius Severus came into power, and he eventually turned, like this brother said, pagan Rome, which had basically been started or restarted by Julius Caesar, which ended when Septimius Severus came into power, and it eventually would go on to the Jake Constantine emperor, who eventually then took pagan Rome and turned it into what we know today as Catholic Rome, right? Where he basically he did away with those, even though he was going off. He wanted to convert the whole nation to a Catholic, or at that time the slave religion, which was Christianity, but he wanted to take over it. So he established he gave the land, he established the Vatican, and he gave the land so the Vatican could be created. And he eventually created what was a religion, which was up until that time a heritage. He created a religion known as Catholicism. And Catholicism, when you look into Latin, means universal, right? So that's where they made religion, and they let everybody come in.
Right, because he was trying to appease the pagans and all the Christians, because the pagans didn't want to convert to Christianity. They want to still believe in their little gods and all of that.
And then eventually, after about 200 years, about 400 AD of Jake ruling Rome, and Rome being taken apart from its original image, it then splits into two. What we know first as the Holy Roman Empire, which is where you would know today as modern day Germany, which the Holy Roman Empire would eventually go west. You had let me actually show you on the map. So you had Rome. It eventually they basically fled. They went north, and they took over this area, and they called this the Holy Roman Empire. Over time, until the time of Columbus, they eventually would come to west and settle in Spain and be known as the Spanish Empire, right? Now, after the Holy Roman Empire was created, you had what was known as the West Roman Empire come down here to Constantinople, and they created this area here, and this area was known as Byzantine, the Byzantine Empire. So you had the Rome of the West, which was for the most part the Holy Roman Empire, and you had the Rome of the East, which was the Byzantine Empire. Now, the Byzantine Empire would eventually be taken out by the Edomites and Arabs, who would come out of the whole Arab Peninsula. But again, that's another story. Let's get back to the lesson. So, you got any more of that?
No, that was it.
So after that,
I can read this real quick.
Oh, sure.
It says he gives a quote from Deuteronomy 28. It says, "And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people from the one end of the earth even unto the other, and there thou shalt serve other gods which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone." Just showing you how we got scattered, One more paragraph. It says, "This prophecy and all the residue of the prophecies contained in Deuteronomy 28, 15 to 68 befell it says, black Jews after they disobeyed the laws of the Most High. Yeah. Many nations transported the Jews into slavery, and the sons of Israel transmigrated to every continent."
And there you go.
It said many nations, so that was including the Africans, the Arabs, like it tells you basically every nation had a hand in our slavery and in our affliction, okay?
I might say something too. Actually, the first slaves, the Southern Kingdom, they came from Spain, It wasn't even the continent of Africa. So how come they don't call us, Spanish Americans or something?
Yep, exactly. And that's exactly what happened, right? Because when you look in into the Northern Kingdom's captivity after Columbus came, a lot of the major port where they were taken back to Europe to was in Seville, Spain. That's where. That's why right there you have a lot more of the religious Spaniards that are in the northern the southern end of Spain in Seville. That's where you have the Sagrada, the family, that big Catholic. Most of the religious people in Spain are in the southern kingdom, or the southern side of Spain, excuse me, by Seville, because a lot of the northern kingdom and also the southern kingdom went there and stuff.
Right.
So now at this point in history, we've just shown how the the southern kingdom had managed to stay in the land for a little bit, but eventually they got taken over by the Greeks, and they eventually would be then later on just handed over to the Romans, and they eventually would be chased out of the land by the Romans into Africa. And at that point, just like the northern kingdom dwelt in the Americas for 1,500 years, the southern kingdom would dwell in Africa for 1,500 years. Now, in that time, there was a lot of crazy things going on in Rome. One of the things, namely, was that the Vatican was going under what you would call a hostile takeover. In the 1400s, you had the Borgia family come into power. And along with the Borgia family coming into power, you had vast amounts of corruption coming into play. And when the Borgia family got into the Vatican, they started issuing edicts, which the Vatican would call paper bulls. And one of the paper bulls that would eventually, which again it was divinely inspired, everything is right, that would eventually begin the slave trades of both the northern and the southern kingdom. It was created in 1455 AD, and it was called the let me get it real quick, Slaki. It was the Pontificus Romanus, but it eventually would be, it's a law saying that the inhabitants of any conquered lands, here it goes, the inhabitants of any conquered land could become slaves to the conquerors. And I'm going to read who actually created it and when it was done. But again, this was done by the Vatican ultimately, and it was called, the paper bull was called Romanus Pontificus. And this was created in 1455 AD by Pope Nicholas V, who wrote the paper bull, in which he gave power to enslave inhabitants of new lands and those sold from Africa. So this was 1455. So about 100 years later, about 50 years later, you eventually would have Christopher Columbus, who came in 1492 to America. He in the 1500s, after Columbus had come, until about the 1650s, you had the Northern Kingdom who had been living there, amongst their own wits. By this time, they had lost their way. They had been sacrificing to demons and everything. They had lost their ways from their original purpose of coming to this new land, and the Lord eventually would take them into slavery. And it tells you here, it says the Native Americans and Latinos faced harsh slavery under the Europeans, Spanish, Portugal, Dutch, etc.
Let me get the precept.
Come on.
This is Deuteronomy 28:48. It says, "Therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies which Yahweh shall send against thee, in hunger and in thirst and nakedness, and in want of all things, and he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck, until he have destroyed thee. Yahweh shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth. A nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand. A nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of old, nor show favor to the young."
And there you go. And so, just like the brother says, man, these people were fierce countenance, because secular history records that 42 million indigenous Indians were killed during the slavery. and only 8 million Indians were left afterwards.
Man.
That's 80% of our people were destroyed, right? That was the true Holocaust right there. Right?
78 million. Yeah.
Said 42 million killed, right? So and that's tricky when you think about it, right? Because the Northern Kingdom, who was over here on the Western Hemisphere, the Edomites came from the Eastern Hemisphere, from the other side of the earth. Now, the Southern Kingdom, they were dwelling in the Eastern Hemisphere. Where did their captives come from? The Western Hemisphere, the other side of the earth. And this right here shows how the prophecies, which, again, I'm going to read in Deuteronomy, actually, you got it up?
28:68.
Which is the original curse that Moses laid upon us if we did not follow the commandments of the Lord that he would put onto us.
This is Deuteronomy 28:68. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you.
And there you go. And that's exactly, when you look at that word, buying them, nobody's going to, that basically, that word right there means redeem. Nobody's going to free us or redeem us. And, come on, exactly. And just like back in Egypt, today, we are all bondmen here, right? Regardless if we have jobs, regardless if we are entrepreneurs, we all have Social Security numbers along with everybody watching this video, more than likely, right? If you have a Social Security number, you are a bondman. You are indentured servitude to the United States of America government, right? You are a product that they are using to lend or borrow money against. And all that money that they borrowed against you, you now, along with all of us, are now on the hook for, which is why we have to pay income tax to the Crown of England, right? Because that's ultimately where the money goes to. Because why? Because that's where some of the kings of Edom live and stuff. That's where they reign from. Now, besides that curse, this eventually would fulfill another prophecy, right? Which would eventually lead to the great falling away, which YAHAWASHI brought up. Can you go and get Jeremiah 17:4?
You know, say something about Christopher Columbus. See, a lot of people, they think that, he settled in North America, like actually America, but he only stopped at the islands of Puerto Rico, which is the Ephraimites today, which were known as the Tainos, the Arawaks, and that's the head tribe of the Northern Kingdom. So, spiritually, the first tribe he conquered over was the head tribe of the Northern Kingdom, which is Ephraim.
Khan. Can you get that?
Egypt.
Oh, it's lucky.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, bro. Go ahead.
Okay.
This is Jeremiah 17:4. And thou even thyself shall discontinue from thine heritage that I gave thee, and I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in the land which thou knowest not. For ye have kindled a fire in my anger, which shall burn forever.
Khan.
Yeah.
This
And
was for a long time ago.
Yeah.
Ain't gonna be forever,
Hey, it's like.
I was just gonna say, and that lines up with 2 Thessalonians, the second chapter, where it talks about we had to go through that falling away first, man. We had to fall as a nation, man. We had to completely discontinue, like the scripture said, from our heritage, man.
And that's exactly, and what we're reading, the historic events, are all the secular mechanism which the Lord used so we would fall away from that heritage, right? The reason why he caused all those fires of the Aztec codices, the destroying of the Northern Kingdom's records, so that way we couldn't have our heritage traced back until down the road when the internet would be created, or as the Bible refers to as the unicorn, would be created, and all these puzzle pieces, which were far and few between, would eventually be able to be put together, and our teachers would eventually be able to find this truth and bring it out to us, so that way they could revive the prophets and bring them back to their true knowledge, which we once knew. Go for it.
It's Hosea, actually going to what you just said.
Oh, yeah.
Hosea 1:10, it says, Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, Ye are not my people, that falling away, there it shall be said unto them, there in that same land in America, mainly, it says, there, And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, ye are not my people, there it shall be said unto them, ye are the sons of the living power. So that goes into what the brother just said about us waking back up, man. You know, the Most High setting up the apostles last, starting off with our elder Abba Bivens, putting the spirit on him, which is John the Baptist, who was going to return us back to the ways of our fathers.
Yep.
You know, and then it trickled down to the apostles. Now in these days, now the apostles are raising up all this fruit, all the elect brothers throughout the world, man. Yep. You know, mainly in America and really all throughout the world, man. You know, wherever we are in captivity, man. You know, wherever we are, we're again being called the sons of the living power, man. All right, through the Spirit, man. You know?
33:10. So, exactly. So, see, just as the Lord took away our heritage,
right.
He showed great mercy, and He continued to choose Israel, and He's going to choose and save us to reign in the coming kingdom, which will come after what you people will know as the alien invasion, or as the Bible refers to as the second coming of the Messiah and stuff. So, can you go
after World War III.
After World War III, or during, yeah, come on.
Jeremiah 33:10.
Come.
It said, thus saith Yahawah again, there shall be heard in this place, which ye say shall be desolate, without man and without beast, even in the cities of Judah and in the street of Jerusalem, that are desolate without man and without inhabited and without beast. The voice of joy, keep going.
Is that the one who said that will never be carried away again?
No.
Well, it was where Israel will never be carried away again.
Oh,
It was 33:10, no?
Yeah, it was 33. Let me find it. Yeah, I think 30.
Jeremiah 33:10?
I think it was 30.
Well, Salaki. But,
it says, therefore fear thou not, O my servant Jacob. Okay, you want to read it? Jeremiah 30:10. Therefore fear thou not. Therefore fear thou not, O my servant Jacob, saith Yahawah, neither be dismayed, O Israel, for lo, I will save thee from afar, and thy seed from the land of their captivity.
Perfect.
And Jacob shall return, and shall be in rest, and be quiet, and none shall make him afraid.
And there you go, right? Because when after this World War III that's going to come upon all the earth, and it's going to be crazy. It's something that we've never seen before. Man. Not only is Esau, the so-called white man, going to bring out all his military equipment and his technology that he has that's 40 years more advanced than what we have today. So you're going to be seeing what you would consider even magical shit out there, right? After that, you're only going to see wonders from Esau. You're going to see wonders that are out of this world from the Most High after this war. But, like the brother just read, once this passes and this kingdom has faded away, the kingdom of the Lord will be established, and us Israelites, the Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, are going to be renewed and will reign with Him forever. And we are going to be a spacefaring civilization. And every one of the 17 nations, minus the so-called Caucasians, who are the nation of Edom, will exist and will be able to explore all the world, all the universe, and even beyond the universe. Because again, as it tells you in the scriptures, I'm going to paraphrase, it tells you, eyes have not seen nor ears heard what is prepared for us. So
I does everything.
Come on.
I have a precept.
Find that precept and speak. Do you have precept?
I have a precept real quick.
All
right, this is Jeremiah 31 and 1. At the same time, saith Yahawah, will I be the power of all the families of Israel, and they shall be my people. Thus saith Yahawah, the people which were left of the sword found grace in the wilderness, even Israel, when I went to cause them to rest. This is the last one. The Lord Yahawah hath appeared of old unto me, saying, Yea, I have loved thee with an everlasting love, therefore with loving kindness have I drawn thee.
Speak on it up.
So basically, yeah, man, Mosai, he's angry at us right now as a people, but hey, man, at the end, Mosai, because we like his woman, the Israel nation, we is everything. So right now he's angry, but after that, he's not going to be angry forever. And then, we're going to be in the good graces of the Most High, because we're never going to go off. We're going to be righteous. And the Most High is just going to spoil us to death, man. We're going to just get everything. We're going to be a righteous people, and we're going to just be ruling, man.
Exactly.
This is Lamentation 4:21. It says, Rejoice and be glad, O daughter of Edom, that dwellest in the land of Uz. The cup also shall pass through unto thee. Thou shalt be drunken, and shalt make thyself naked. The punishment of thine iniquity is accomplished, O daughter of Zion. He will no more carry thee away into captivity. He will visit thine iniquity, O daughter of Edom. He will discover thy sins.
Perfect. Did you read that? Like that? Can you read that part where it says? So when you look at the land of Urs, that's Iraq. So when did the so-called Caucasian or the white man get into all this trouble? When he went into Iraq. So the Lord right now is referring to Edom in the last time. Can you read that part again?
It says, rejoice and be glad, O daughter of Edom, that dwellest in the land of Uz.
So there you go.
The land of Uz was actually a city in the land of Edom. You know, he was just referring to.
My bad. I thought that was
Yeah. Basically, it's referring to a kind of America because that's where Edom is dwelling. You know, it's kind of making the correlation. You know what I'm saying?
And just to say, hey, just to know that we getting closer with these prophecies. The last one is fucking with Iran, and you see us these tensions going back with Iran.
And and that's why Trump is who he is.
So it started off with Iraq. You're right, brother, with all the resources they had, but really it was to get to Iran. Govern everybody.
They had a whole plan laid out.
Yep.
But I got one more, and then we're gonna go to that Daniel. Go for it. You know, this is Nahum 1:9. It says, "What do ye imagine against Yahawah? He will make an utter end. Affliction shall not rise up the second time." So pretty much what this scripture is saying is we're never going to go into captivity ever again, man. We're not going into captivity under the Edomites, the Ishmaelites, none of that. You know? So like we're going to bring out the scripture in Daniel 4, because our kingdom is going to be an everlasting kingdom, man. Because the reason why, like we were explaining, the reason why we went into those captivities was because of our iniquities, man. But when we get to the kingdom, the Most High is going to make us perfect, man. He's going to give us those new bodies so we're not going to sin anymore. So if we have no sin, we're not going to die, we're not going to commit it, you know? So pretty much we're going to be in the Most High's favor forever and ever, man.
This is Daniel 7:14. And there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion and an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. Skipping to 27. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to. Alright, this is Daniel's 7:14. And there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom, that which shall not be destroyed.
Yep, so all those nations, all right, all of the people in the nations shall serve him. It's talking about serving us, the Israelites, YAHAWASHI and the elect that's joint heirs with them, man. You know, all these other nations put us under captivity. With the time that's coming when we get our kingdom, we're going to put them back into captivity, man. Like the scripture tell you in Jeremiah, that all that devour thee shall be devoured. All that spoiled thee shall be a spoil, man. You know, and all thine adversaries, every last one of them is going to go into captivity, man.
Right.
Go ahead.
Skipping to verse 27. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High.
Yep, and this hasn't happened yet, man. America is not the kingdom of heaven, man. All right? This hasn't happened yet, man, because the Israelites need to be put back in power, man. We need to be taken back to our land by our power YAHAWAH. BAHASHAM YAHAWASHI. Go ahead.
Whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominion shall serve and obey him.
Yep, so the Most High raised up all these kingdoms of these heathens like we went into, but he brought them all down. He brought them all down, man. Because at the end of it all, his people were supposed to be ruling on the planet Earth, man. He made us kings and priests, man. But we went off, so the Most High put us in captivity. But now we're coming into the time, we're waking up, we're getting our heritage back. The Most High is going to save us through YAHAWASHI. We're going to get the kingdom. And our kingdom is going to be an everlasting kingdom, like I said, because we're going to be perfect, man. We're not going to be in iniquity anymore, man. All right?
And that's it. So, and so with all that, do any of you brothers have any?
I had a scripture, the one talking about where they
go for it.
Most High is going to put it in our inward parts.
Go.
It says, but this is Salakia, this is Jeremiah 31 and 33. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, said the Lord. I will put my law in their inward parts and write it in their hearts, and will be their power, and they shall be my people. And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them unto the greatest of them, said the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more.
Amen. And there you go. See, so that right there is the coming kingdom. That's what we have to look forward to, people. So hopefully this video was edifying, and hopefully this delving into history, going into the captivity of both tribes, and tying it into history. Hopefully this was edifying and will help clarify the spider web of history, which you are not purposely taught in school.
Right.
So to end this off, I want to go ahead and give all praises to
YAHAWAH, BAHASHAM, YAHAWASHI, BAHASHAM, BARAK.
Double honors to our teachers, the apostles of Great Millstone, who has taught us all these truths and facts, and have opened our eyes according to the prophecies of the Bible. And shalom to the 1/3 of Yasharallah, and peace and mercy to the elect. Shalom.
Shalom.